You're listening to an archived CabralConcept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stevencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the CabralConcept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Thanks so much for joining me here today on this Total Wellness Tuesday. We're going to be covering the topic of, are high oxalate foods ruining your health? So there's a lot of talk lately about the anti-nutrients in certain foods, whether they be lectins or specific items in nightshades, or today we're going to be talking about oxalates. So this is a topic that I did want to bring up. It has been coming up over and over as a question in my practice as to when I actually put someone on a low oxalate diet, who those people are and who is not affected by oxalates in general. So if you're someone dealing with symptoms such as a pain in your side or somewhere around your kidneys in the back that can become more intense and then kind of dies down a little bit, or you might get some painful urination, or your urine could look a little bit cloudy or even have a little tint of red or brown to it. Or if you have foul-smelling urine and you don't know the cause, we could be looking into this as well. If you're someone with joint pain, stiffness, kidney stones, rheumatoid arthritis, or autoimmune-based issues in general, really, really important. A constant need to urinate. So if you're someone that feels like you need to urinate all the time, this could very well apply to you. Anyone that sometimes gets nauseous or more prone to vomiting after specific meals. If you're someone who feels like you have more flu-like symptoms, or you're more prone to bloating and digestive distress in general, this will be one topic that you'll want to be paying attention to. And the last one I'll say directly I can see in my practice, but not always in the research literature yet, is that those people suffering from brain fog or kind of like overall moodiness could be looking at an oxalate toxicity-based issue as well. So when I talk about oxalates, I want you to know exactly what they are. When we talk about oxalates, we're talking about a lot of the same anti-nutrients such as lectins that help to keep pests or bugs or just those things in nature away from eating specific, mainly vegetables, but I'm going to give you the big list of what they are. And what it does, though, is when we take them in, it can interfere with our absorption of certain minerals and nutrients and also begin to build up in the body. And as it builds up in the body, it can affect our liver. It can certainly affect our kidney. That's the main area that we're looking at, both kidneys, and its ability to actually cause calcium-based stones in some people, so kidney stones and calcium oxalate-based varieties. Now, I'm going to teach you today exactly how that happens and how some people are affected by it. I also want to go over how additional oxalates in the diet can form very painful crystals called calcium oxalate crystals in the body. And they absolutely can form in the kidneys, and that's where we typically see them, but they can also form in the joints as well, almost like a gout or rheumatoid-based arthritis. So what we're going to do is take you through it, which foods are highest in oxalates, how you may be affected by them, and then also how to flush them out of your body and make sure that they're not going to build up to become an issue. So an easy way to actually see if you're suffering from calcium or from oxalic acid-based overload is to run an organic acids test. So I just gave you a lot of the symptoms right there, the urinary tract infections, which I actually didn't even mention that, but the painful urination, cloudy urination, foul-smelling urination, have to frequently urinate, those people with brain fog or headache or autoimmune or joint pain, kidney-based pain that we spoke about, stiffness, overall stiffness, any one of those symptoms, well, this could be something that you're suffering from, but you'll be able to actually pin it down if you eat your normal diet and then you actually run an organic acids test. And I've done this test so many times, I can actually even tell you it's the second page, third one down from the top, number 21, and we're looking at the oxalates. There's actually 3 different numbers that we look at. with oxalic acid being the main one. And we're looking at that from calcium intake in the diet, which can affect actually kids with autism, ADD, ADHD as well. That's actually really important, and I didn't mention that in the beginning, that we often see that well elevated, and this is especially true in autism. So very, very important we look at this. I do want you to know, though, and I'm going to give you the foods, that there are other reasons besides foods of why oxalates may be high. And in my opinion, they're even more important than the foods. Because as I explained about the low lectin diet, I do hope that you'll tune into that show. Again, all previous shows are at stephencabral.com/podcasts. And you can just type in lectin diet in quotations. You'll find my synopsis of a low lectin diet, who it's needed for, and why really it's not going to be an issue in the long term for most people. Okay, so high oxalates, they're going to come from certain foods, and I'm actually going to link up the list today. So you can simply go to stephencabral.com/984. And at 984, I'll give you that PDF to download today. I'm going to be creating a new one, so depending on when you see when you get to this actual show, it might be our own private one, because the one that I'm going to be linking up, the research has things that you would never typically hopefully eat anyway, such as like Fruit Loops and frosted mini wheats. So I'm going to create a healthier list that makes it a lot easier in high, moderate, and low oxalate-based foods. But let's go over the list, and I want to give you some of the high ones right now that you may want to really be aware of. And again, I'm going to go through the list, though, and then how to get rid of this from your body as well. So we're going to consider really anything over a 30 a higher oxalate-based food. And so that would be bamboo shoots, fava beans, kidney beans, navy beans, refried beans, beets, French fries, okra, potatoes with the skin, mashed potatoes, potato salad, sweet potatoes borderline, rhubarb, very high at 541 milligrams. Again, you want yours under 10 milligrams if possible. Spinach at 755 milligrams. Raw spinach that was cooked at 656 milligrams. We got turnips, we've got yams at 40 milligrams. Okay, so the moderate ones I just named, the really high ones are rhubarb, spinach, both cooked and raw, potatoes with the skin on, and beets and navy beans. Those are very, very high. I'm going to go over a couple more ones that are high. Canned pineapples are borderline, that's at a 30. Okay, I know the almonds and soy, yes. So soy milk, extremely high, 336 milligrams. We've got soy burgers at 58 milligrams, soy nuts at 392 milligrams, soy yogurt at 113, textured vegetable protein, 496 milligrams, tofu, 235 milligrams, almonds, 122 milligrams, and then cashews are at 49 milligrams, so they're a little bit lower, walnuts at 31 milligrams. All right, lentil soup, 39 milligrams. Miso soup, 111 milligrams of oxalates. And we've got cacao powder, 67 milligrams. Chocolate syrup, 38 milligrams. We've got hot chocolate at 65 milligrams. So chocolate in general is a little higher in oxalates. Okay, in terms of your low oxalate-based foods, well, most fruit are low in oxalates. So basically, apples and apricots and bananas and blackberries and blueberries and cantaloupe and cherries, grapes, lemons, limes, mango, melon, nectarine, orange juice, papaya, peaches, pears, pineapple, plum, strawberries, and watermelon, all low. The only ones that were higher, believe it or not, were especially if the core, the canned or dried pineapple. So we're looking at that as moderate oxalate based. Okay, the only fruit that I was able to find that was higher are raspberries. Raspberries are 48 milligrams, okay? Kiwi and grapefruit, they're low. They're 12 and 16 milligrams respectively. But dried figs also. Dried figs, 24 milligrams. Dates, 24 milligrams. Avocado, 19 milligrams. Carrot juice, 27 milligrams, okay, just because it's concentrated. So the thing is, these are not necessarily to be avoided, but what we're going to try to do, if you believe you have an oxalate-based issue, is we're going to keep our total oxalates under 100 milligrams for the day. So I'm going to give this handout to you, and you can, again, you just go to stephencabral.com/984. There's no signing in, there's no charge, anything like that. Just go right to the website and you can download this list. So if you believe you have an issue with this, you'll simply try to keep your total oxalate load to 100 milligrams or less per day. It will not be difficult for you to do. You'll just have to look at the total list and then go from there. Now, if you're someone that loves spinach, well, a half a cup cooked, 750 milligrams. So you'll do a temporary removal of those high oxalate-based foods. But again, you'll add them back in and you might feel no difference. I'll get to that in a moment, all right? I don't want to get to all of that quite yet. So just gives you a really, really good list of just, there's probably like a dozen foods that we really want to stay away from on that high oxalate-based diet. And then I always like to say, though, but what can we add in? Like, what are the good foods for us? Let's focus on all the great things that help to actually remove oxalates from the body. And those are anything with higher levels of calcium. So again, let's take a little step back. When oxalates build up in the body, they can cause crystals, and they can also bind with calcium. So what we get are a blocking of the kidneys. We can get urinary tract-based issues. We can also get painful urination, and we can get pain in any of the muscle tissues, any of the joints actually from these crystals building up. And again, these are natural plant-based compounds that are meant to protect themselves exogenously outside of themselves. We take it in from outside of us against certain little creatures. And again, some people are better than others at excreting that. And I'm about to share with that right after I get to the great foods to be eating. Okay, some of the great ones are broccoli, watercress, that's that Boston accent coming out, kale, and okra, as well as salmon and sardines if you are not following a vegan-based diet. So broccoli, watercress, kale, okra, and salmon and sardines. The reason these are very high natural calcium-based foods that are also lower in oxalates. What does that mean? Well, it means that if we're taking in higher calcium foods, we're able to help with the excretion of oxalates, okay, or oxalic acid. So those foods will actually help people with oxalate-based issues. Now, myself being one of those people, and I'll explain why in a moment, I've always gravitated to eating more broccoli. And for me, it's always made me feel great. And so that's why I say every single day I eat broccoli. Every single day, 1 cup at lunch. And it's just the heads, none of the stems. So I'm getting all of the nutrition from those broccoli-based sprouts. Watercress is something I'm starting to introduce more of in my diet. It's not as easy for me to get. It's not carried as much where I am. But that's one that's can be very, very powerful. So kale, I know a lot of people talk about this in terms of leafy greens and all that. But they're not high in, kale is just not high in oxalates. So it's 2 milligrams per cup. I don't do a lot of raw kale. I actually do 0 raw kale, not because of the goitrogen effects or anything like that, since that affects very few people, but actually because of its digestibility. The only time I'd eat kale if it was really well cooked inside of a soup or a stew, or if it was a kale crisp. But I don't eat too much kale in general. I certainly do eat wild salmon and sardines. But again, if you've heard my podcast for any length of time now, you know that I am vegan basically until dinner, and then, or vegan diet at least. Then from there, I'm having a couple times a week some type of animal fish-based protein, okay? More fish than anything else, following more of a Mediterranean-based lifestyle. But you can go back to previous shows and find out all about that. All right, so what I'd like to do now, though, is talk about other ways that I see these oxalates come high on an organic acids test. So we have to really be cognizant of this, because there's a lot of functional medicine doctors, there's a lot of health practitioners out there that are talking negatively about high oxalate-based foods. But the problem is very few people have an issue with eating spinach. Very few people. Very few people have an issue with eating a lot of these other healthier-based foods, whether it be, let's say, kidney beans or navy beans, especially in like their own homemade vegan or paleo-based chili. Of course, you wouldn't probably be eating beans on a paleo-based diet, but they don't have issues with rhubarb. They don't have issues with many different types of potatoes. So, I just want to say that this is not for everyone. This is what I see from a clinical perspective. So there's a very big difference. And again, I love researchers and I love all of the PhDs out there, but there's a huge difference between what should happen in the real world and what happens in a lab, right? So in the real world, this is when I see oxalates affect the greatest amount of people. And this is also why I believe it's an issue with ADD, ADHD, autism, as well as rheumatoid arthritis and other based issues, and even UTIs, is that there's intestinal permeability with people. There's a lack of good bacteria to bad bacteria. And we're just putting that in air quotes, right? And there's a higher overgrowth of candida. Okay, so why am I saying all of this? It's because I've run thousands of organic acids tests, and I'll link up that lab test just at stephencabral.com/984. And since I've done so many, I can see the correlation between the high candida levels and the high oxalate levels. Now, if I see a high oxalate level and I don't see high candida, well, I can also say, okay, this person then could really just have issues with high oxalate-based foods. Or they don't have as much intestinal permeability, but we do see the waste from yeast and candida. Either way, I give people the option to go on a low oxalate diet. But for the most part, I mean, I'll tell you, less than 99 out of 100 am I putting someone on a low oxalate diet. When am I doing it? When after 12 weeks, they still have some joint pain, some urinary tract-based issues, but typically that's gone. But if it's still there, like if they're still having a problem with their fingers or their thumbs, or they have just a lot of stiffness in the body, I will put them on a low oxalate diet. Or they still have moodiness, or they have a lot of brain fog, absolutely, we're going on a low oxalate diet. But honestly, it's very simple. We just eliminate the dozen foods or so that are quite high, and I just give them 100 milligrams or less to play with during the day. So they still get to eat a lot of their favorite foods, but they make minor adjustments. So I want to give you one example as well. Every day I do my Purple Crush smoothie, and a lot of people say, well, there's spinach in that. That's high in oxalates. It's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, and that's why if it affects you, if you're going on a low oxalate diet, well, what could you do instead? Oh, instead, if you like kale, you could certainly put that in there. But you could just put in some bok choy. You could put in some lettuce. You could put in some butter lettuce or romaine. Any one of those would be fine because those are lower in oxalates. So all you do is a one-for-one replacement. You don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You could even put in some collards. That's 10 milligrams. You could throw in some celery. That's 10 milligrams of oxalates. So what I'm trying to say is, you can still do all the same things. You just make a small replacement. Just, if you're worried about it, I agree. Then don't do the spinach. Totally understand. Super simple. Just replace it with another healthy green that you would like. Or you can just use the daily fruit and vegetable blend powder, which is a lower level of oxalates, and then you get 22 organic fruits and vegetables right there. So we talked about the yeast overgrowth as being a major factor. Why? Because here's the problem. Candida waste, so the liver also makes oxalates. And we see this also from yeast overgrowth and candida overgrowth. That's why it's very, very important to look at that, is that it's not always just the foods, it's also our endogenous production. So again, so important that we look at this specifically. A couple things that I didn't name is any inflammatory-based conditions. I really, really want you to look at that. A lot of women that I work with as well, and they might have interstitial cystitis or vulvar pain. So I really recommend that you do look at this overall and that you begin to look at the underlying root cause reasons why. Candida, a big one. So what do we need to do? Well, again, you can test for that in the organic acids test, or we do the Candida and bacterial overgrowth protocol to remove that, then repopulate the gut. Another big one is fructose. So people who've taken a lot of fructose can actually have an endogenous production of oxalates as well, even though fruit in general can be lower in oxalates. So you can see our body can produce our own natural oxalates as a byproduct in the liver, or we can get them from exogenous vegetables and things like that outside of our diet as well. And beans are a big one as well. And the last part is that taking in an excessive amount of vitamin C could cause your oxalate levels to increase as well. Do I see this all the time? No, not usually. I don't, but it is a possibility, and so we should know that as well. If you're taking more than 5 to 10 milligrams of vitamin C a day, that could certainly lead to an increase in oxalates as well. And again, some people are going to be even more sensitive. There are many specific genes. So if you're someone that's dealt with kidney stones or calcium stones, I'm going to link up a PubMed article for you to check out in your genes. One of the ones specifically with oxalates is the SLC26A1. I know that probably doesn't mean too much to you right now, but you'll be able to see that on the PubMed study to see if you deal well with oxalates or not. I'm someone that just, did not hit the genetic lottery in terms of a lot of these things with gut-based issues and absorption. Again, I can eat high oxalate foods now. There's no issue. There honestly is no issue. I can't overdo it. I really can't. I mean, I'll say that, but I can't overdo it with fructose, and I can't overdo it with lectins. I can't overdo it with nightshades. I can't overdo it with any of these things that could exacerbate an immune-based dysfunction. Because remember, I was at a decade with immune-based dysfunction, And I know that it's been over a decade now since I got well, but I still don't want to go back there, right? So I'm just watching that in general. I did literally drop a nuclear bomb in my intestines by taking 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin, right, of antibiotics. So a lot of that innate base bacteria that was there is no longer there. Now I repopulate. I use my daily probiotic support. I've already gone through my own Candida protocol, right? I did the Saccharomyces boulardii. I did the lactobacilli-based strains only first, and then I began to repopulate. So, I've done the work, and then I eat the good vegetables for my natural prebiotics. I make sure that there's no yeast overgrowth. I make sure that I don't use antibiotics. And I don't overload with fructose because I know that could be an issue for me as well, since I don't metabolize it as well. Now, do I eat lots of fruit? Absolutely. Do I eat lots of vegetables? Of course, that's a majority of my diet, but those things are important as well. One more thing that I want you to know is that those people that overdo protein have a more difficult time naturally eliminating oxalates as well. Okay, so let's give you some real tips here. What's an easy thing to do if you're someone suffering from high oxalates on an organic acids test, or you have a lot of these symptoms? Okay, we're going to go low oxalate diet first. We're going to do that for 3 weeks. That's it. That's all you need to do. And then you can begin to introduce them a little higher. So we'll go down to, we don't want to go down to 0 because that can really start to ramp up the binding and removal of oxalates, and you could feel worse, right? More of a Herxheimer-based reaction. So what I'd like you to do is maybe you just pick one. Maybe you just take out spinach right now, or beets, right? Or soy-based milk if you're using soy milk. I don't think soy milk's a health food in the first place, to be honest. Too much of an isolate and too many estrogenic-based effects from just using a soy isolate. I can't recommend that. Soy powder, protein powder, can't recommend it. Soy burgers, can't recommend them, just because of all the fillers in them as well. I did a podcast on that. If you're using a lot of organic sprouted tofu every once in a while, a couple days a week, then I don't have an issue with that unless you're someone more prone to the effects of estrogen. But at the same time, if you're postmenopausal, there's some research actually showing that it does help, since it's a plant-based estrogen compound that does bind up the receptors, and it's less harmful than estradiol or estradiol-based metabolites. So we're going to go lower oxalate for 3 weeks, and then we start to add things back in and see if it affects you. And you know what? A lot of time it won't, because the real issue is this, and I will give you the real issue, okay? The real issue is too much protein in your diet. You could be well over 20% of your diet from protein, okay? The other thing is this, not a lot of people know this, too little calcium in the diet, okay? So we need more calcium in the diet. The second is magnesium, right? How many people are deficient in magnesium? So many. I've done a podcast on this. Magnesium basically is a miracle of magnesium. And now, what's another big one? And I just spoke about this earlier. Removing candida. Until you get rid of the candida overgrowth, you're not going to remove or eliminate your oxalate-based issues, and it's going to leave you more susceptible to high oxalate-based foods because you're already having your own endogenous internal production of oxalates, and waste from candida, which is oxalates. That's only one form, but it is one form. And now you're taking in more from the outside, right? So you're filling up that rain barrel. It always goes back to the rain barrel effect. Honestly, it does. And I didn't make up the rain barrel effect. I want to be the one to bring that to the world. Is just like, listen, these things in small amounts don't matter. In large amounts for many days in a row, or you have something like candida overgrowth that's huge, a lack of magnesium that's important, too much protein that's important, and a lack of calcium important as well. And now, what is that magical B vitamin that I talk about all the time that so many people are low on? If you're going to be low on a B vitamin, it's not even B12. It's not. I look at that all the time on lab tests. And again, you can see this on organic acids test if you're low on this particular vitamin. The one that people are low on is B6. B6, right? Paradoxal 5-phosphate, paradoxin 5-phosphate, P5P, different names for the absorbable form. So important. When you are low in this vitamin, you are also not going to be able to properly handle oxalates. So we have so many people blaming high oxalate foods, just like we have people blaming lectins, when oftentimes the real issue is, one, we're not eating the actual fruit or vegetable in season, which will lower the lectins. For grains, we're not cooking them properly or sprouting them or whatever needs to be done. But the other is we're really deficient in minerals and vitamins. I talk about this all the time, right? I say, what are the issues? What are the issues we're dealing with right now for all disease of the body? We're dealing with a deficiency, right? So if we're not able to properly deal with oxalates, certainly there can be some inborn genetics, but really what exacerbates that? A lack of calcium, a lack of magnesium, and a lack of B6. And then what I say is it's deficiencies, right? We need to replace our deficiencies to help with disease of the body. But what else could there be? There could be toxicities, right? There could be toxicities. What are the toxicities in the case of high oxalates? Forget about the high oxalate foods for a moment. What are the toxicities? Candida overgrowth and too much protein intake. So there we go. So we have toxicities that need to be removed, too much protein intake, as well as the candida overgrowth or the imbalanced microbiome, such as having SIBO, right? That can lead to IBS-based symptoms. But we also then have the toxicity from the protein, toxicity of the candida overgrowth, and then we have the deficiencies. So I'm telling you right now, when you go deep on these things, it's not just say like, oh, what do you think about phytic acid? I can't believe you're recommending grain sometimes. Listen, like, again, when I'll talk about phytic acid in the future as well. It's not that big a deal for most people. The big deal is that they're not cooking these things properly, they're not eating them properly, they may be eating too much of them, or they have other gut-based issues. Because these things, in the long run, don't have to be harmful to most people. However, if you're genetically susceptible, or you have those symptoms right now, they should be eliminated. So if you're someone dealing with chronic urinary tract infections, you're dealing with brain fog and really irritable-based mood or lower-based mood, and you are you have problems with the urinary tract in general, we say we have autoimmune-based issues, super stiff, or you have, I said rheumatoid arthritis, but any joint-based pain in general, we're going to want to eliminate these foods. We'll do it for 3 weeks. Do you feel remarkably better? Then great. Oxalates might be an issue for you, but also we just need to get that body healthier. Let's look at what type of gut-based issues you have going on. Because remember, if we're talking about a food-based issue and you tell me that your gut yet has not been balanced, then I'm telling you most likely it's a gut-based issue. So here's what we need to do. We need to figure out if it's H. pylori or it's parasites. We can do that with a stool test. Then we need to figure out if it's candida or it's SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Again, we can do that with an organic acids test and a stool test. If we do those two tests, we can figure out what's going on with your gut. We can then remove the toxicities, okay? Then we can begin to rebalance and rebuild that gut. And then by all the healthy foods you eat, and then just something like the Dr. Ball Daily Protocol, you're going to be able to get all the nutrients that you need on a daily basis to be able to handle all of the great foods that we've been given on this earth to eat. So hopefully this makes sense. I'm actually happy to do any follow-ups that you may have on this. Please let me know. I know it's a complicated topic, but I really try to break down the biochemistry from inside of the body and the nutritional biochemistry to things that you can use in the real world that we also don't need to just kind of, like I said before, throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Not everything just needs to be thrown out just because it's in the news, it's in the media. It is an issue. It's a real thing, but it's not a real thing for the majority of the population. And if it is, let's figure out why it is. Let's figure out why the issue, and then we'll begin to rebalance that gut and microbiome. Hopefully today's show was helpful. Always let me know if there's any follow-ups. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, please do feel free to pass this show along to anyone else you believe it could serve. I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at stevencabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Stephen Cabral. And that's Stephen with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.